Coming straight out of our 2022 annual Wealth and Spirituality Retreat, was where we reorganize and rededicate ourselves to our life's purpose, and we do it in a very systematic and practical way that's actually measured. The biggest issue that I see time and time again with my clients and myself in the past was this word called ego. And we have a whole coaching program dedicated to the dissolution of the ego and actually helping a person become free from it. But that's a whole other topic. But I'm going to get into some of the characteristics of the ego, because the ego is going to be your biggest opponent, not enemy, but opponent in 2022. So keep watching and learn more. In other videos and in my coaching program, we talk about the difference between the ego, which is the false self, and the neo, which is your true self. The neo is there before there's an ego that comes around the terrible twos, and it's there after the ego dissolves. But let us just dial in and focus on the ego, because we need to call this thing out, which it's an ancient archetypal program of the mind. So the ego isn't real. It doesn't exist in the physical world. So it only exists in the psychological world. And there's some characteristics that came out of this course that we do. And I want to share those with you right now. Number one is the ego only focuses on one out of infinity. This is an infinity sign. What does that mean? The ego focuses on one out of infinity. Well, out of infinite possible things you can focus on right now, if you're only focusing on one and you're not choosing it, chances are it's the ego. And actually, that's how I technically define thinking as opposed to mental activity. Mental activity is all that information that's going all the time. It's like your mind is tuned into different radio stations and visible frequencies, and you have these thoughts that aren't your own. Well, the difference between mental activity, which is automatically going to be there unless you learn how to turn the dial down, and thinking is out of infinite possible possibilities, infinite possible thoughts. This is what I'm choosing, or this is what you're choosing in this moment. If you're not doing that, if you're not choosing out of infinite possibilities, then you're not thinking. There's that mental activity. A lot of people mistake these. So the ego wants you to focus on one out of infinity. Well, what does that mean? Out of infinite possible options, it wants to focus on something that's limiting and that's a problem, and there's no other possibility. And it'll make more sense as we get down the list here too, but that's just something I want you to keep in mind. The ego generally does always and never. This always happens this way. This never happens, to me this way. Or this always happens to me. This never happens for me. So generalizations, which is the ego will speak from everything and everyone, which is never universally true. You can't apply that in everything. Like if you were to say, everybody does this, or everybody does this. Okay, maybe everybody goes to the bathroom, right? But everybody is angry all the time. Well, that's not true. Some people actually shut down their emotions and don't experience anger at all. But that's a whole different topic. But look out for these signs when the ego says always and never. Again, these are some of the telltale signs of the ego. It doesn't mean when you say always or never that it's always ego. It's not what I'm saying. I'm saying these are the common patterns when you put these all together. This is what the ego, it's the playbook of the ego. The ego also uses a lot of identity language. I'm, things like that. Meaning, what's identity language? Well, we have emotions as human beings. However, we are not our emotions as human beings. I'll say that one more time. We all have emotions as human beings, but we are not our emotions. That doesn't define us. It doesn't make us, except where it comes to the ego. The ego will grab a hold onto those identity, let's just say sadness, and say, I'm sad. So raise your hand or not if you ever said the words I'm sad before. I know I have. And what does that really mean? Well, there's different levels. Could you be experiencing sadness? Yes. But the ego language is I am sad. I am identified. I equals whatever I'm saying. I am bored. I'm sad. I'm scared. I'm lonely. And the reality is that's not the whole truth. So if in a coaching session, clients might say in the past, like, oh, I'm depressed. And then I might say something like, is that all you are? Aren't you more than that? Or when aren't you depressed? Have you always felt that way? What caused you to choose to decide to feel this? So we actually can get to the root causes. But when I look out for a big flag for me is when people say like, I am sad. Let's just use that for an example. Well, one level of disassociation from the ego is I'm sad is I'm feeling sad. Another level, double dissociation from the ego, instead of from I'm sad to I'm feeling sad, is there's sadness inside, or I'm experiencing sadness. I'm experiencing this emotion. This is what I'm experiencing. There's a lot more consciousness to it. This, there's no, I am this, and there's no other possible choice. So look out for that language, identity language, especially negative language. Next one is zoomed in, like a telescope point of view. So what does that mean? Imagine these two markers put together as a telescope, or I'll put these markers in my pockets because you can do this where you're at right now. But just imagine you take one hand, make a little hole, and the other hand, make a hole, make a little telescope like when you're a kid. And then you can put it up to the left or right, whatever you choose, and pick one thing in the room to look at right now. So I'm looking at you in the camera right now, but you pick something in the room that's not on the TV screen or the camera or on whatever device you're looking at right now. And you pick something to look at. And if you look at that, this is very much metaphorically like the ego does. It zooms out of one thing. And then if you remove your hands and look at what else there is to look, that is more your consciousness, your awareness. That's more of your true self. But the ego likes to zoom in on one thing, make it one out of infinity, and make it all or nothing, always or never. It's just something the ego does. So there's zero awareness and it's a solo focus. Now, I know I'm giving you a lot of information, but I'm sharing this information that we do daily for our coaching sessions, for our weekly training. This is what we talk about. This is the language that we use, and we're sharing it with you. And I realize for some of you it might be new. Other of you, I might be really resonating with you, and that's totally okay, wherever you're at. But the zero awareness and solo focus means your consciousness can only become aware. Your mind can only focus. There's a huge difference between your awareness and your focus. This is the focus. You have your telescope and you're really focusing in. You can only focus on a limited amount of information or one thing or small things at a time. In fact, your conscious mind can only focus on a very small, that's the metaphor, is whatever you can see through your handmade telescope, that's what your conscious mind can focus on, compared to your unconscious mind. It can focus on so much more. So that's just something pretty interesting, but the ego's gonna wanna zero in and solo focus. I'm gonna only focus on one thing. Usually it's the problem, usually it's an obstacle or limitation. Then we're getting into contraction. The ego always, if you get down to the root of it, there's gonna be some sort of contraction, a shrinking or a small. Now, if there's people with like narcissism or people with their ego is just out of whack or it's too big, and they might try to say condescending words or negative or lash out words to make somebody else feel small, and that still counts too. They might feel small inside to make somebody else feel small. So, but generally speaking, whether it's for yourself or other people, when the ego is speaking, because the ego is rooted in fear, it's going to really want to contract you, which kind of goes to the bottom, but we'll get to that in a second. General blindness. If you zoom in and focus on one thing, you can't focus on the other stuff. The ego wants to focus on one thing and delete and not even address everything else. That's how you know one of the telltale signs that there's the ego present, because there's a lack of awareness. Focus, hyper-focus, maybe even 100% focus, but zero awareness. Focus is what you're maybe looking at. Awareness is you're aware of other senses. I'm looking ahead, but you can look ahead, but you can also be aware of what you hear simultaneously while you look. Not consciously, but unconsciously. And you can also, what do you feel as you're looking and hearing? And if you're eating or having different experiences, what are you smelling or tasting or sensing as you're looking and hearing and feeling? It's interesting to think about. So the ego cannot see reality. This is a really, really good one. It can only see its perception of reality, which is synthetic and made up. It's a projection or It's internalization. So I'll say that one more time. I want you to think about that for a second. The ego cannot see reality. Reality is what's happening in this moment. Reality is what's happening between you and me without any judgment. What's between you and I right now is not good or bad or right or wrong. It just is. The mind and the ego, two separate things, can put meaning to that. So it cannot see reality. It can only see its perception of reality, which is limited, of course. It's made up, it's projected, or internalized, and it's very synthetic. So what does synthetic mean? If you ever get your oil changed, you usually have two options. You can get the regular oil or synthetic oil. Synthetic oil is generally used for cars with a little bit longer mile or a little bit more miles, and it actually can last longer. Instead of the general 3,000 miles, you can get it for 5,000. So synthetic, the difference between synthetic and real, you can look at anything in your mind. You can think about your underwear. It's such a great example because most people, when I talk to them, they're not looking at their underwear. Usually I can't see that. I never can see them because people usually wear their underwear underneath pants or shorts. But you can think of your underwear. And if you consciously think about this in this moment, the picture you have of your underwear in your mind is not your underwear itself. It's synthetic, it's made up. You can do this for anything. Think about your driver's license. The picture in your mind you have of your driver's license is not your driver's license. Think about your best friend, your parents. Any pictures that we make up in our mind, that we create our meaning to reality, it's synthetic. It's artificial. It's made up by the mind. The memory is never the real thing. It's something that's really, really interesting. And then the last one here, which is a really, really important one I want to drive this home with, is the ego wants you to only focus on things that benefits the ego. I want to say that one more time. The ego only wants you to focus, not be aware, but focus on the things that benefits the ego. You see, the ego is this ancient archetypal program, is what I shared before. The ego is meant to, we all have an ego at some point, and it's meant to give ourselves the ability to learn and experience. It generally comes at the age of around the terrible twos, but through consciousness work, and generally, depending on what your belief system is, over many, many lifetimes, or at least 105,000 hours of consciously focusing on dissolving of the ego. The ego can dissolve and eventually collapse in on itself. But the ego is gonna fight, resist, tooth and nail. It's gonna grab a hold on to anything. The ego is even gonna grab a hold on to that idea of getting rid of the ego. But you can't get rid of the ego, it can only be dissolved. But it wants you to focus on things that perpetuates its existence, that continues it to exist. It's how it's built, and there's so many infinite ways and strategies and techniques that we use every day with our intra-awareness coaching that actually can counterbalance, mitigate, and dissolve it. So this is a really, really good list. It's not the complete list, it's just a list, a small snapshot of certain tricks and playbooks that the ego games that the ego plays. And the more you can see it, bring your awareness to it and call it out, you can head it off at the pass, and you can actually overcome it and allow it to dissolve so you can actually move forward with your 2022 goals. So the ego is going to be the biggest obstacle for your year and your life. It is going to tell you that it's your enemy. It's going to tell you that you should try getting rid of it and killing it. I highly recommend not doing that. I tried to do that. I tried to get rid of my ego. I tried to kill my ego, and it actually caused me a lot of hurt and damage until I finally surrendered and realized I have no control. Of course, you have to use divine presence, higher consciousness, the source of everything, whatever you choose to call it. You have to use something higher than yourself, that which created you. You need to team up with that to be able to dissolve the ego, and it's an ongoing process. So this video is meant to bring you awareness, and hopefully you get some golden nuggets out of this, and be really gentle on yourself, because it is a process to dissolve the ego, and it is a process to achieve your dreams, and life itself is a process. Thank you for watching today. Send you a lot of blessings, love, light, and support, and I'll see you in the next video.